Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled The Evidence is in Physical Literacy in Childcare Settings Results in Many Benefits. This webinar is a collaboration between Sport for Life and Active for Life, and together we honor the traditional lands and homelands of all Indigenous peoples and communities across Canada, including First Nations, Inuit, and Métis living both on and off reserve in rural and urban communities. My name is Tyler and I'm with Sport for Life, and we're pleased that we could team up with Active for Life and provide a forum to share information about this proof of concept study around the potential benefits of daily physical literacy and active play. Before I hand this over to our two speakers, Don Clark and Richard Monette, just a couple of housekeeping items. The session's being recorded and we will be sending out a follow-up email in the next day or two with a link to the recording, so anyone who registered will be able to access the recording that way. If you look to the control panel to your right, you'll see a handouts tab. If you open that up, there are 4 handouts that speak to the proof of concept study, and Don will be touching on those in a little more detail later on. We've got a couple of polls that will be opening up throughout the session, so you'll have a chance to engage with some content that way. And also, we're going to be sharing a video partway through. If for some reason you have any audio issues when the video plays, we just encourage you to make sure your volume is all the way up and that your headset is working as well. Finally, we encourage questions. So again, if you look to the control panel on the right, there's a questions pane. Please type any questions that come up in there. We will be replying to some throughout the session in the questions pane, and the rest we will save, and we'll have a verbal Q&A at the end. So with that, I will turn it over to Active for Life's Richard Monette.
Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar. My name is Richard Monette. I'm the Managing Director of Active for Life. Today we're going to have Don Clark share some information with us. Active for Life is a not-for-profit, privately funded organization that really strives to help Canadian raise physically literate children. And for us, the ECE sector, the early years childcare centers are extremely important. So Dawn?
Hello everyone, my name is Dawn Clark. I'm a Professor Emerita in the Department of Child Studies and Social Work at Mount Royal University. And I've been looking at early childhood development, early brain development, and the role of physical literacy in healthy child development. And I'm very pleased to share the results of this study with you.
So to start, get us going today, we're going to take a poll of who's attending today. So you'll see that you can choose a category, and that's going to give us a really good idea of who's in the audience today.
Great, thanks, Richard. We're just about 86% completed the vote. I'll wait till we get up to about 90, 95, and then I'll close the poll.
And part of the reason that we're asking who's attending today, it gives us an idea of the perspective that you have when you look at physical literacy and active play every day. It just helps us understand your role in this whole field.
There you go, Don. There are the results.
All right, so we have 17% educators. Is that 6% teachers? We have a lot of rec leaders, 41%, and other at 35%. So that's interesting. We'll have to see who those others are. All right. As we move. So this is a partnership, as Richard explained, between the early years physical literacy, and I didn't explain what that was, but when I was still at Mount Royal University, several of my students and I put together this research team to conduct applied research within childcare centers and with early childhood educators, because we were trying to design and test resources for childcare settings, which are quite different, as we've discovered, from what teachers in school settings would use. And so that's been part of our work. And I forgot to mention in the introduction that I'm also a facilitator for Sport for Life with their early childhood education physical literacy workshop. So we came in as the applied research team to work with Active for Life.
And for us, the reason we got involved and we initiated the study with Don's team as well as co-funded it. We funded the first phase. There's really two reasons. The first one is that healthy habits that are developed in the early years tend to stick for life, and that for us is extremely important to help children develop the right habits early in life. And the second reason is that according to Statistics Canada, about 60% of kids under the age of 6 are in some form, formal or informal, of childcare. So if you put these two facts together, you see the importance of this sector for the future of our country, the future of physical activity in our country. Now, this is the context of why we're here. You know, there's a lot of talk about children not being as active as they should be. And one of the reasons, according to our perspective, is that the digital age has led to very significant changes in our habits. If you think about things you see every day, you know, parents handing their iPad to a 2-year-old to keep them quiet, childcare centers keeping children inside when the weather is wet or snowy, schools restricting play at recess. You know, there are some schools where you're not even allowed to play with a ball. Parents modeling an active lifestyle. What we believe, what our perspective is that children are not as active as they could be as the result of unintended outcomes. So it's like all these little things that children are told every day. There's no bad intention behind it, but the sum of all of this leads to children being habituated to inactivity. So Don, what did you find in your study about this state?
It was an interesting thing that we looked at. We wanted to confirm with the parents who were consenting their children to participate in this study. So we sent a parent survey out at the time of consent. We were looking at the Canadian 24-hour movement guidelines for children. So these came out in 2017. Prior to that, Canada didn't have any guidelines for children under the age of 5 until 2012, because there was the assumption, as Richard said, that young children are physically active, that they naturally move all the time. So we wanted to confirm whether or not the families who were consenting their children to participate in this study, where they sat on the guidelines from the Canadian 24-hour movement guideline. So the guidelines are no screen time for children under the age of 2. They are changing that a little bit in time of COVID, where pediatricians and others are saying that FaceTime or Skype, reading with grandparents over those tools, keeping in touch that way when they're not able to see their grandparents is something different. But simply entertainment on screen times should not happen for children under 2. And for children 2 to 4, it should be less than 1 hour of screen time. And for children this age group, 3 hours of daily physical activity. So think about that. 3 hours a day is 21 hours a week. So what did we find? We had over 700 parents respond to the survey about their children's physical activity. Now, remembering the screen guidelines, these parents acknowledged that 30% of their children exceeded these guidelines on weekdays. So that's after a full childcare day. These children were exceeding their screen time guidelines on weekdays, and 60% on weekends, exceeding those guidelines. Only 26% of the children of parents surveyed get even 1 hour of physical activity per day at home. So only 26% are getting 7 hours a week of physical activity. The other 74% are getting less than that. So if you think about that, if the requirement is 21 hours a week, and we have only 26% of our children getting 7 hours a week, this is a huge request of childcare settings to ensure that children are physically active during the day, because that's where the activity is going to have to come from.
That's pretty amazing results. So if you take the situation we presented earlier, that children don't move as much as they should, that they're not as physically active as they should because of an accumulation of all kinds of little unintended nudges. What is our challenge, us as organizations and us as a sector and us as parents and us as educators? Well, for us, the way we see it is that it comes down to those who are in charge of kids' time, the gatekeepers of children's times and activities. And especially when you're talking about the early years, 0 to 5, there's always an educator, a parent, or some other caretaker in charge of what a child will do. So what we endeavor to do is to help whoever is the gatekeeper acquire the competence, the confidence, and the motivation to support children in developing the habit of being physically active. So to summarize, if children are inactive because of a million nudges to inactivity, it is our common challenge to counteract these unintended nudges with very intentional nudges to be physically active.
And we took that challenge when we looked at what the characteristics of early childhood educators generally are. And we find that there's sort of 4 categories of educators. The first, they're already on the path to daily physical literacy and active play. They're perhaps active themselves. They engage in lots of activities with the children. They have the opportunity perhaps to take the children out into natural play spaces, well-equipped centers. They're already on the path. And so they're the converted. Then we have a group of ECEs who are very interested in physical literacy and active play, but they're not sure how best to incorporate it. And the best way I can explain that is to think of people who are very concerned about climate change. And they understand how to recycle and reuse. But beyond that, they're really not sure what they can do as an individual to make a difference. And those are the people who we were really interested in working with in this study. We wanted to see what kinds of supports and motivation they needed in order to feel comfortable and confident in incorporating physical literacy and active play every day. We also find that this digital situation that Richard talked about is not new. So my colleagues and I, when we get our students into early childhood programs at the college and university level, in their 20s, late teens, early 20s, we find that they haven't experienced physical literacy and active play in their own childhoods. So these are our students who perhaps were latchkey children, and their parents said, you go home, you don't go outside until I get home at night. I need you safely in the house. I want to know where you are. Or they were the start of the generation where parents felt that children needed to experience a wide range of things in their early childhood. And so they were in scheduled soccer and skating and music lessons and gymnastics and all of those kinds of things after school. But they didn't experience simply active play in their own backyards or their communities. We find that a lot of these young students have never skipped. They don't know how to use a skipping rope individually. They certainly don't know how to use the one where you a longer rope with a child on either end, and heaven forbid, double dutch. They don't know how to play foursquare or hopscotch because that wasn't part of their experience as children. So when we're trying to encourage them to reintroduce those games into the early childhood sector, we have to teach them first. And then we have a lot of new Canadians from cultures, both parents and educators, particularly in Alberta. We have about 60 to 75% of the educators in our childcare are new Canadians, and many of them come from cultures where active play was not appropriate for girls, or they come from cultures that are a little bit warmer than ours, and they look at today in Alberta, it's snowing and it's -10, and so what do they do with children outside? They don't have that experience. It's important to note that educators are not phys ed teachers, and few have any physical literacy education in their background to become ECEs at all. So to get into our study design, as Richard mentioned, there were 2 phases. The first was funded by Active for Life, the second by the Government of Canada. And you'll notice the end date of the second study being March of 2020, and you'll notice the last bullet on the slide that indicates COVID complications. I'll get to that in a minute. We wanted to do a comparison study, so we invited centers to participate in the study, either as study centers where we provided a lot of support, or as control centers where they just carried on with their practice, their good practice as usual. Total participation, we had approximately 20 centers per phase. What we did with the control centers in phase 1, we invited them to participate as study centers as a thank you for being a control center during the second phase. So we had a total of 39 childcare centers and family day home agencies, always with a minimum of 5 educators per center or 5 family day homes per agency. Total of 97 educators, 663 children. That number dropped from the 712 whose parents provided consent at the beginning of the study. Children moved from one center to the other, but COVID indeed provided a complication. We were in fact collecting our final data in March as centers were closing, and so we did lose a considerable amount of data because of COVID complications. We offered workshops throughout. We were aiming for parents primarily, but we also had lots of educators in this, either in the family day home agencies or in larger centers who weren't directly involved in the study. And so we had 307 workshop participants. We provided intervention materials for all of our study centers, and I encourage you to go to the Early Years Physical Literacy if you want to see more of these. So we started with a framework of what active play and physical literacy every day, or our APPLE model, looked like. You'll notice in the center of the APPLE, the core, is a very basic definition of physical literacy by Margaret Whitehead, 2010, the motivation to move, the confidence to move, and the competence to move for a lifetime. So I know Sport for Life has expanded that definition considerably, but working with very young children, we stay with just those 3 items. And that became the core of the APPLE. Now remember, if we're looking at childcare centers providing a minimum of 2 hours minimum per day, and that still won't get the majority of children to 21 hours a week, we need to somehow embed it directly into the programming of every day. So it has to be more than a 10-minute activity break, or in schools, a half an hour phys ed period. It has to somehow be a part of everyday programming. Now, most provinces across Canada regulate a specific amount of time for children to play outside, varying from an hour to 2 hours. Alberta and a couple of other provinces don't mandate any outside time at all. It's required to have an outdoor play space, but it's not required to actually use it, which is a bit of an irony. So when we looked at how would we support educators to build physical literacy and active play into their curriculum, their programming every day, we started with the environment. In early childhood, we talk about the environment being the child's third teacher. The parent is the first, the educator is the second, and the environment in which they're raised is the third. So we wanted educators to look very closely at both their indoor environments and their outdoor. What opportunities are they providing in that environment for children to be active? So for example, indoors, we encourage educators to move some of the furniture or equipment out of their playroom, to give children room to move, to jump, to dance, to twirl, to climb, to balance on benches. There needs to be room indoors for children to be active. Outdoors, we really are discouraging now the building of any new fixed play structures. They're very expensive to build, expensive to maintain, especially the safe ball surfaces. And for most of us, the play structures are actually closed during the winter months because the ground freezes. And so for licensing officers, that is no longer a safe fall surface. So get rid of the fixed play structures and instead, both indoors and outdoors, think of providing a range of loose parts, things that are free or cheap. If they get broken, you can throw them away, like huge cardboard boxes, pieces of wood, milk crates, tires, boulders, stumps, things from the natural world that can be both indoors and outdoors, and encourage children to explore. In fact, as they come in, their curiosity is piqued. What's this new thing in our environment? How can I build something with it or use something? So the environment, both indoors and outdoors, is crucial. The second part of the skin of the apple is play. With young children, play is paramount. That's how they learn. They learn through exploration, through using all of their senses. They need to feel and see and smell everything that in their environment that allows them to learn. And they need time to practice something. So if you have a young child or you work with them, you know that they'll practice something over and over and over until they've mastered it. And then they're done with it and they move on to the next challenge. So children need that time during the day, and that means it has to be longer than a 15-minute exploration. It needs to be an hour or a 2-hour exploration. And play, of course, needs to be joyful. The third part of the skin is the engagement of the adults with the children. So supervision is incredibly important, but we would like them to talk about active supervision. How do they engage with the children? Do they model a specific activity? Do they extend the play? Do they play with as a participant with the child leading the play? The engagement with the children was crucial, and we found some really interesting results around that piece. And then the fourth part of the skin of the apple is the relationships. Relationships between the children themselves as they're playing, between the educator and the children, relationships with parents, with licensing officers, with supervisors. What are the relationships? How can the staff talk about what they're doing with physical literacy and perhaps even introducing risky play? How do they share that with parents, with their supervisors, with their licensing officers? How do the relationships become built as we move through the Apple model? Some of you, particularly from BC, will see that this is a familiar model. After we had developed it and tested it quite thoroughly, we were approached by Appetite to Play and PJ Naylor, their researcher, and we did a little bit of tweaking with this, so the Apple model is now a part of Appetite to Play. Now, how do we support educators in following this framework or this model? So my students on the team constructed this 12-week introductory program, which we called the seeds. So the seeds to grow the apple trees. These are 12 very simple activities that demonstrate clearly how to incorporate physical literacy into the curriculum, into the programming. They consist of 3 phases. The first one, well, for example, the first, and all of the activities address one of the fundamental or more of the fundamental movement skills. So there are activities that focus specifically on balance and stability, that focus on locomotion, and that focus on object manipulation and coordination. So the first activity in the seeds is called squirrel tails. And so, for example, the educator would gather the children and they'd begin to talk about squirrels. Do they see squirrels in their community? If they haven't got a lot to say, perhaps they take a neighborhood walk and begin to look for the squirrels. And where do they see them? And how do they move? How do they climb up a tree? How do they climb down? And unlike us, squirrels come down head first. How do they do that? Have they seen the squirrels go across the wires on the back lanes or across the roads? How on earth do they hang on to a skinny little wire and stay balanced? What do they use their tail for? Is it an umbrella? Or do they actually use it for balance the way we would use our hands? So once children have a good idea of what squirrels are, they maybe have read stories about squirrels, they've done some artwork, the educator then lays out, using painter's tape, the outline of a tree on the floor. And together with the children, they practice moving along these branches as if they were a squirrel. Can they move forward? Can they move backwards? Can they move heel to toe? Can they jump or hop or leap from one branch to another branch? Can they bend over, staying balanced, to pick up pine cones or acorns off the floor and put them in their basket? And then the environment, both indoors and outdoors, is set up for the children to continue to practice balance. Benches that they can move along, more tape, obstacle courses that encourage them to jump over gaps. Outside, there are logs or pieces of wood that they can balance on, that they can climb. And so the children then have lots of time to practice what was introduced through the concept of apple seeds. We were very open to having these activities adapted. So for example, we had a family day home provider in rural Alberta, and we tend not to have squirrels in the rural environment, and they didn't either. But they were studying Groundhog Day. They were doing this activity during the end of January, and they were excited about Groundhog Day, which is really interesting because, of course, we don't have groundhogs in Alberta either. Balzac Billy for us is a gopher. But regardless, they learned about groundhogs. They read the book called The 10 Grouchy Groundhogs. And because a family day home has children from infants up to those going to kindergarten, the provider here set, instead of a tree, outlined what looked like the burrow underground of the groundhog. And so the tape was about 6 inches apart. And so her infants could crawl or toddle along the paths between the tape, and her older children could balance along the outside of the tape. She had a flashlight at the entrance to the burrow with a little blanket that the children could pull over their heads and flash the flashlight on, and if they saw their shadow, they knew they would have 6 more weeks of winter. She left that on the ground inside on the floor. The children walked their stuffies along this maze. They drove their trucks along this maze. The older children figured out games of hopping and leaping and jumping and balancing on one foot along this maze. That's an example of how this was sometimes adapted. Another activity is called Ready, Aim, Kick. And the idea of that activity is for children to create their own targets and then to learn how to kick towards their targets. This was a particular child care center up in Cold Lake, Alberta, way up north. And she was doing this activity during the time of one of the first snowfalls. It was a light, fluffy, although warm enough to create snowfall. So the first day that she took the children out, they just wanted to explore the snow. It was the first snow of the year. These were 4-year-olds she was working with. And so they just played and rolled and threw the snow for the first day. The second day, the educators wanted to have the children create some snowmen. They thought maybe their targets could be big snowballs or snowmen. And they discovered that the children had never made snowballs. There's another thing that, you know, our young parents and our young ECEs often haven't done. And so they then spent the next 2 to 3 days teaching the children how to roll increasingly larger snowballs out of the snow in the playground. She sent a photo, and the entire playground has these streaks where there's no more snow with a big snowball at the end. And then they created their targets out of these snowballs, making snowmen. But the children decided, because it was too hard to kick balls in the heavy snow that they had, that they would ride their snow carpets down a small hill and see if they could smash down their snowmen. So the educators decided this was a phenomenal activity that kept the children outside and active for hours. First thing the children wanted to do was to keep their snow pants on when they came in the mornings and go outside and play. But it wasn't teaching kicking. So they moved that activity indoors into a hallway that they had. And they discovered that one of the children who was creating, he had a lot of challenges in controlling his behavior, controlling his emotions. He'd be really good at the beginning of the day, and it would, you know, his ability to control this wore off towards the end of the day. They discovered he loved kicking a soccer ball. And so because the hall was right outside their playroom, they could see what he was doing. He could be kept safe there. When he needed to take a break, he was allowed to take his ball out into the hallway and kick. And even the parents noticed that the child's energy and anxiety level had reduced because he had access to go kick the ball whenever he felt that he needed that time. So these were the two tools that we provided for all study educators. We met with them online every couple of months to go over the activities, what were they doing, what were the adaptations they were making, what artwork were they using, what books were they reading. RAs went to visit several times, and this was how we managed to provide the intervention for the centers. So the benefits that we were looking for, and now I'm moving into the handout that you have that Tyler mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. You have 4 handouts: benefits for children, changes in educator practice, benefits for educators, and an overall summary of the study. So the proof of concept study was designed to determine if we would find benefits for children cognitively, socially, emotionally, and physically. And we were blown away with the benefits that we found for children. So if you look over at the cognitive, 88% of our study centers suggested that the children in their care had improved communication skills. These included children with various cognitive disabilities, and often children who did not speak English as a first language. But because the children were actively playing together, they were having to negotiate their play for significant periods of the day, their communication skills improved. Those of you who have or have worked with toddlers know that there reaches this point where you just learn the word, please tell me what it is you want or need. And it's the same with children in childcare. If they have communication skills and can begin to express what it is that they need or want, their anxiety levels go down and their behaviors improve. We found that 91% of the educators said that their children were more able to pay attention, to concentrate and retain information. And those of you who have studied for exams, you know that. If you're cramming, you can study for 45 minutes or an hour, but if you take a break and go for a run or take the dog for a walk, you can come back and be more able to focus. Young children are exactly the same. While people worried about the amount of time that they were spending playing, when they brought them back together to circle or to do some of their other small motor activities, the children were more engaged. 87% of educators said the children were more independent. They were able to figure out how to play on their own instead of always looking to the educator or the adult to help them decide what to play. Socially and emotionally, results stunned us. 88% of the educators said that their children were better able to take turns, to share toys, to problem solve, and to play more cooperatively. And whether you have children at home as a parent or you work with a group of children, if you can have children develop these skills early in their lives, the days are just so much better. 75% of the educators said that children were better able to identify and name their emotions. And as the saying goes, if you can name your emotion, you can tame it. 91% were better able to calm themselves in times of distress. And distress was often during a transition period. Children wanted to go outside, but it's difficult to help them transition, particularly in the winter with so much clothing to put on. Then they get outside and it's really difficult to transition them back inside. But educators found that 91% of the educators found that children were better able to calm themselves. Physically, 87% loved adventurous outdoor play, especially infants and toddlers. And that one was also a surprising result. Our physical fundamental movement skills measurement showed significant improvement for infants and toddlers. And when we thought about it, most infants and many toddlers only go outside in childcare strapped into a multi-child stroller for a neighborhood walk. When we encouraged educators to actually put the infants on the ground, both in the spring and fall and in the winter time, and to have their toddlers outside being physically active. We saw major improvements. 94% of educators said their children were more active, both indoors and out, and that they played for longer periods of time during the day. Down the right, the changes in play that the educators saw: more time in free play, 100% more imaginative, more independent, more adventurous, and engaged in risky play. A couple of quotes from our educators: the children listen better, they're talking to each other more and beginning to problem solve for themselves. Their cooperation skills are improving and they're able to work out their problems and take turns better. And I hope you're starting to see the trend here in the benefits and how that might affect the educators. So let's take a look at the educator practices. Just like the definition of physical literacy is motivation, confidence, and competence to move for a lifetime, we wanted to see if we could change the educators' motivation, confidence, and competence to include physical literacy programming. And look at the results. 96% of our educators said they were more motivated. 93% were more confident and competent. And that slight drop in confidence and competence didn't bother us, because if they're motivated, they're going to continue to pursue daily physical literacy. 86% of the educators were able to offer more physical literacy activities in their indoor environment. And when you think that most people think that active play and physical literacy is an outdoor adventure, 86% of them improving in their indoor environment was extremely important. 79% improved their physical literacy activities in the outdoor environment. And 100%, every single one of our study educators said they were more engaged in play with the children. So no more supporting the wall with a cup of coffee in one hand while the children are outside playing. Every single one of them were engaged in play with the activity. Some of the comments: instead of saying don't or no or stop, I can say, can you show me again how you did that? So we had one educator, infant program, children up to 20 months old, and the children were always wanting to climb the chain link fence around the outdoor play space. And instead of saying don't, she said, okay. And she stood there actively engaged with the children. Don't forget to put your toe all the way through the hole. Reach up with your hand first. And she sent a beautiful picture of about a half a dozen of her little ones, maybe 6 inches, maybe a foot off the ground, hanging on to this chain link fence with huge grins on their face. Nobody climbed to the top. Nobody fell off. Everybody was operating within their own comfort zones, with the educator right there, not to catch when they fell, but to support and encourage. Another comment: educators now see the need and the importance of physical literacy, because the results of the study showed so many benefits for children that they could see that this was an important thing for them to be including for children. And as one said, now I can plan age-appropriate physical activities, not only outdoors, but also indoors. Now, this next slide was something that just blew us away. We weren't even thinking of looking for benefits for educators. But throughout the study, they kept telling us what they were finding, why this was so important for them. 100% of our study educators said the following: that they felt that children's needs were better met through increased physical literacy. So other ways that they were trying to meet children's needs maybe weren't as successful, simply increasing the amount of time that children could be physically active in play. Everybody said that the numbers of challenging behaviors declined. So if children had increased communication skills, so they were able to talk better, if they had learned how to cooperate and negotiate and take turns, and their needs were being met, why would they have challenging behaviors? Transition behaviors declined. The behaviors at the end of the day as children were getting tired declined. Everyone in the playroom was happier and calmer. And as a result, every single one of our study educators has told us they will continue physical literacy programming. Relationships was part of the skin of the apple, and we were really interested to see what might have been there. The educators felt 91% of them that relationships improved among the children. So they commented on how all the children were engaged. There wasn't the outlier or the lonely child or the one who wasn't included. Relationships between children and staff improved. They felt they knew their children better, they understood their needs better and how to meet those needs. And because they played with them, they had a different relationship with them than just standing back and supervising. They also found, 73% of them, that their relationships with other staff improved because they were talking about what they were doing. They were sharing what they were learning, and it became a learning opportunity among all the staff in the center. And those of you who've had children in childcare know that, you're often late when you drop the children off in the morning because it's difficult to get children ready and out the door, this transition times. So it's often a quick drop off. She hasn't had breakfast. Can you feed her something for me, please? And even at the end of the day, you're often there just before the center might close and there's all the other parents. And so you don't have time to talk necessarily. But educators said that they felt that their relationships improved with parents because parents were starting to ask what was happening with their children, why their children were showing these improvements. Educators said when the kids' behaviors are calmer and smoother, it makes your day better too. Why would you want to go to work when you've chosen a field to work with children because you love being with children, and then you find your day managing challenging behaviors, saying no, saying don't, saying stop, saying sit still, come here, when the physical literacy improved those behaviors and everybody was calmer. Our relationships with the children have grown stronger. And I love this last quote. I'm a believer in the power of movement and playfulness. I'm a believer in the power of movement and playfulness. Now, we didn't expressly ask parents at the end of the study. We did our pre-study to see what physical activity looked like. It would have been phenomenal to have redone that survey at the end. However, we weren't sure that we would get much of a response anyway. And then when COVID hit, we were really glad we hadn't included that. However, we did run a number of workshops. And so informally, we asked parents at those workshops, we had over 300 at workshops. We asked them informally, what did they notice? Why were they interested in coming to a workshop to learn more about active play and physical literacy? They noticed increased physical ability. This comment came primarily from very active outdoor communities where they were often hiking or cross-country skiing or snowshoeing, whatever. And they noticed that their children were developing more strength and balance and more coordination, and they were better able to participate in the outdoor activities that the families were doing together. They found the children had increased confidence. They also noticed improved emotional regulation at home. So again, the transitions to and from childcare, transitions for bedtime, that seemed to be improved. They ate and slept better when they came home, and they enjoyed going outside. So we found that parents were saying that, remember back to that pre-survey and the amount of screen time that children were getting after childcare during weekdays. Instead, children were saying, can I go outside and play? Awesome. Saying goodbye in the morning was much easier because the children were excited to see what new adventures would be in store for them. And they accepted and enjoyed active play challenges. And the educators told us, with all of the documentation that they would put up in the hallways for parents to see their involvement in the study and what the children were actually doing during the day, that's 36% of the parents expressed interest in learning more about physical literacy, which is where all of the workshops came from. And we've lost the bottom part there. 31% of parents noticed, they noticed increased physical abilities and calmer behaviors at home. So with that, we'd like to show you a 5-minute video. And Richard, I'll let you set the context for it, please.
Well, as Dawn explained, this study took place in 39 childcare centers across Alberta and BC. And a few months ago, I got into my car and I traveled to many of these childcare centers. And I asked the main stakeholders, so the educators, the parents, researchers, what was their experience? What did they live through this study? And this is what some of them had to say.
My name is Dawn Clark. Over my very long career, I have been advocating for the importance of the early years. I know that one of the easiest and most effective ways to develop healthy child development is to encourage physical literacy and active play for children every day, both indoors and out. Active play develops healthy bodies, and that's a basic human right. And we also know that children who learn to love to move do better in life. In partnership with Active for Life, my research team and I have conducted a proof of concept study in childcare center to provide evidence of these multiple benefits. And we also found that there were benefits to the educators and families as well. We were pleased to note that educators didn't find implementing physical literacy every day to be something that was expensive or difficult. It was easy and inexpensive.
Hi, my name is Amy. I'm the director of an early childhood center and I supervise 20 staff. We were a participant in the physical literacy proof of concept study. The activities from Active for Life were really easy for our staff to use. They were able to implement them indoors and outdoors. They were becoming more confident in allowing the children to take risks and try new things. I did notice that the staff were no longer standing around supervising the children. They were actively engaged in all of the activities with the kids. We also noticed lots of benefits for the children throughout each day. They were better able to manage their emotions during transition times of the day, and they were staying at learning centers for longer periods of time every day. The children and the staff were more active every day, which was amazing. The activities didn't cost us anything. We were able to do them with no money needed, no extra supplies. We'd like to thank you for making these resources available on Active for Life for free. We share them with our parents and staff to help educate them on the importance of physical literacy in their everyday lives.
My name is Christy. I'm a parent of a child at Stepping Stones Childcare Centre from the Revelstoke Childcare Society. Mac is 4 years old. We've noticed changes at home with Mac. We've seen that when he's been active and he has his big play, that he eats better, he sleeps better, his emotions are more in check. With Mac being a part of this program at Stepping Stones, the educators have done a phenomenal job of integrating it into their daily programming. We find that he is wanting to jump higher and climb higher and move more than he might have before. He has an increase in his confidence level, and working together with his childcare providers has been an amazing experience.
About 60% of Canadian children under the age of 6 are in some form of childcare, formal or informal. Therefore, it's critical that childcare provide physical literacy and active play for healthy child development. But unfortunately, the early childhood sector is often undervalued by both society and government. So it was a courageous move for B210 to fund this study and to seek additional funding from the Government of Canada. My research team and I are very thankful that we had the opportunity to be part of this innovative initiative. As the next step, we'll take the evidence from the study to try and influence and encourage policymakers to embed physical literacy programming into childcare so that more children, families, and educators across the country can benefit.
So our main takeaways after our lovely video with Amy and Christy. Educators found physical literacy programming simple to do. It didn't require a great deal of planning, equipment, or space. It was inexpensive, and it engaged the children in many ways and met their needs. Educators spent less time managing behaviors and more time enjoying activities. And the children enjoyed being more physically active. They played longer. They showed more imaginative and cooperative play. And overall, everyone felt more calm and productive and built stronger relationships. So we're going to finish with a final poll before we get to questions. And Nick, you can start this while I explain it. That would be awesome. We're really wanting now to figure out ways of taking the data from this study so that we can ensure that more children across Canada have the opportunity for physical literacy and active play every day. And so we're asking you to think of how you might commit. Who could you influence? Do you have decision makers within your sphere? Do you have access to the early learning and childcare programming within colleges and universities where you could include more physical literacy? Are you able to encourage parents to request increased physical literacy in their children's childcare programs? As an educator, can you change your own practice to include more physical literacy? Or as a director, how can you support your staff to offer more physical literacy and active play? We'd really like to see what your commitment levels, what you might be able to do to take this data, this evidence, to increase children's opportunities.
Right, so we're just about 60% voted, Dawn, so we'll just give it another moment or two. I know there's multiple selections people can make.
Yes, I know. And feel free to check as many as you can influence.
There were just about 80% complete, so I'll close the polls there and share the results.
Oh, wow. We have 57% who can influence decision makers. Please, please do that. I think that is going to be huge. 24% of you can support including physical literacy in college and university programming. 54% of you can improve your own practice that's encouraging parents. And I honestly believe if parents start asking for physical literacy in childcare, our policymakers will do that. Nick, I'm sorry, I can't read the last two percentages. Changing my practice?
Yeah, changing my practice to include more physical literacy and active play comes in at 38%. And supporting my staff to offer more physical literacy and active play comes in at 51%.
Those are awesome. That's incredible. And so I would really encourage you to accept this challenge and see what you can do to make a difference. We really want to see that more children have the opportunity to have more active play. And with that, we are coming to our thank you, and we'll open it up for questions.
So Dawn, I've monitored the questions as we went along. We only have 4 minutes left. We tried to answer as many questions as possible, but there's 4 questions that came up a lot. The first one is the study published? The answer is no, but could you give us a very quick outcome of when and where it might be published?
Yes, so the article on the study has been sent to the Canadian Childcare Federation for inclusion in Interactions, which is a journal for members only. But they've also said that if they do publish it in Interactions, and we've had a tentative approval for publication, they'll also post it on their website, which is open for everybody. You can also see data and reports on the Early Years Physical Literacy site, as well as on Active for Life /ECE.
Perfect. Another question that came up is how could all the activities be adapted to children with disabilities? And also a relative question was, what was the level of accessibility for children with disabilities with the centers involved in the study?
Right. So I'll answer the second one first. Almost all of the centers that we worked with had children with diagnosed disabilities. So we found that they were doing the normal types of adaptations that they would do for those children. Specifically, though, we've been working with a number of agencies that specifically work with children with disabilities. So one of them is a large school in Calgary, Renfrew Educational Services, and they have been working with us to adapt the activities for children with disabilities. And again, they found that indoors and out, they've been able to do that. We've also been working for 2 years with Edmonton Catholic Schools, and they have a program called the 100 Voices, which is an early intervention program for 3- and 4-year-olds for children with diagnosed disabilities to help prepare them to enter kindergarten and not be left behind. Their results almost mirror ours with the work that they've been doing. And the joy of that particular program with both BEAD prepared teachers and early childhood educators working together, similar to Ontario's junior kindergarten and senior kindergarten, many of those programs are outside for almost the entire program day. And their results over the control classrooms that haven't done it are remarkable. I just did a webinar with them last week, and they're remarkable. So it's very possible.
We have a very Canadian question from someone from Manitoba. How can all these activities be adapted and used in a cold environment?
So we had several centers, for example, Cold Lake up in northern Alberta, where they started doing every one of the activities outdoors first during the winter. So they were the one I talked about, building the snowman. So almost everything can be adapted to go outside. We are currently working with some of our northern childcare centers and with Amy, who you saw in the video, to put together an apple seeds for the winter, which we're hoping to be able to post on the website within the next, I know it's not gonna be in time for winter, but COVID has really put a kink in everything. So we're looking to do that. And then one of our centers in Revelstoke worked primarily with infants. And so she's putting together a package of how she adapted the activities for infants, children under 24 months old. So again, we'll hopefully do that. COVID's just slowing us down. And I apologize.
Thank you, Dawn. We're at the top of the hour. So there are 2 websites on the last slide where you can find more information. Tyler, there's a lot of questions about if the video will be shared, if the webinar will be shared. So I'll leave it to you to close it and maybe tell people how they can access all this information.
Sure, thank you. And yeah, just want to thank you both very much for that presentation, Dawn. That was great.
That's awesome.
We had a lot of really solid engagement in the question pane, which was awesome. I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to all the questions, but yes, we will be sending out a follow-up email within the next day or 2. It will include a recording to this webinar so people can watch back. We will also include in there the 2 links that you see on Dawn's slide here, Dawn's email address, and also some links to some of the other resources that were highlighted and discussed. I know some people were asking about the Apple model, for example. We'll make sure there's a link to that. And then, yeah, definitely there'll be a chance for people to follow up with any further questions. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining. Really appreciate people spending their time with us today. And again, a big thank you to Dawn and Richard for putting this on.
Thank you for your attention and engagement. Wonderful morning. Thank you.
Awesome, Dawn. Thank you very much, everyone.